Welcome to today's historical deep dive. They say absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what if absolute power isn't given? What if it's taken? What if a man born with nothing but a name and an island decided he didn't just deserve an empire, but that he alone had the right, even the power, to grant it to himself? If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. You stand in the hushed, cold grandeur of Notre Dame Cathedral, December 2nd, 1804. The air is thick with incense and the weight of 1,000 years of monarchy. Outside, France has bled through a revolution that severed the head of one king, swore off divine right forever, and stumbled through chaos. Now, inside this ancient sanctuary, they gather to witness the birth of a new dynasty, founded not on lineage, but on willpower and war. You watch him, Napoleon Bonaparte. The music swells, the clergy are present, the Pope himself is here, imported like a historical prop. The moment arrives, and Napoleon, the man who built his throne on revolutionary ideals and military victories, performs the unthinkable. He does not kneel before the Pope who sits awkwardly nearby, representing centuries of spiritual authority that validated monarchs. Instead, Napoleon reaches out, his hand steady, and takes the heavy golden wreath of laurel, a symbol heavy with the ghosts of Roman emperors, placing it firmly upon his own head. This is not divine right inherited. This is destiny seized by sheer force of will. It's a lightning strike of self-assertion in a world still steeped in tradition. With a practiced flourish, he turns, this new emperor, and crowns his kneeling empress, Josephine. In this singular, breathtaking act, you witness the ambition that propelled a Corsican outsider from obscurity to the absolute pinnacle of European power. It screams louder than any cannonade. I owe this to no one but myself. It's a magnificent, terrible display of ego made manifest. But look closely at the eyes beneath that self-placed crown. In that defiant gesture, is there also a hint of insecurity? A need to overcompensate, to legitimize a power that wasn't born of royal blood, but of gunpowder, popular acclaim, and sheer grinding effort. This moment, intended to solidify his reign for centuries, paradoxically sets him apart. He's not just an emperor. He is the self-made emperor, a title that carries immense, terrifying strength, but also inherent instability. He bypassed tradition, believing his will alone sufficient, that his own hand was holier than any pope's blessing when it came to his own fate. The insight here is profound. The pinnacle of power can be the most isolating place imaginable, especially when you believe you climbed there without help, owing no fealty but to your own ambition. Greatness, forged in defiance, built brick by brick through personal struggle, often struggles to find peace or true partnership. Was this brilliant foresight, recognizing the new age, or breathtaking hubris, believing he was above the ancient currents of legitimacy? Ask yourself, standing in that cold cathedral, witnessing history bend to one man's will, was this act the ultimate declaration of independence or the first subtle tremor of the instability that would eventually shake his empire apart? What would you have done, standing in his boots, holding that heavy crown? The stone corridors of Brienne Military School echo with footsteps you know intimately. You are small for your age, just a boy really, yet your eyes hold an unnerving intensity, scanning, calculating. This isn't home. This gray, disciplined world is light years from the sun-drenched chaos of Corsica. Here, your thick accent is a perpetual target. They call you pile au nez, straw nose, a childish cruelty that stings with the venom of perpetual otherness. You are an outsider in your own chosen land. But within these austere walls, a different world opens through the pages of books. You devour history, tracing the campaigns of ancient conquerors. Geography becomes a canvas for future movements. Artillery manuals are not just technical guides. They are blueprints for reshaping battlefields, for imposing will upon chaos. And mathematics. Math is your sanctuary. In its cold, pure logic, you find a world you can control. A system where inputs yield predictable outputs. A stark contrast to the capricious, unfair world outside. Here, your mind finds its first true dominance, a quiet, internal conquest. This intense focus isn't just academic curiosity. It's born from a burning resentment. You feel the weight of your family's precarious finances, the subtle slights of classmates from more established backgrounds, the condescension towards your origins. You are looked down upon. You are poor. You are foreign. This perceived disadvantage isn't a weakness. It's the grit in the oyster, the painful irritant around which a pearl of ferocious ambition begins to form. This is where it happens, the forging of an iron will. It doesn't come from inherited privilege or effortless success. It is hammered out in the furnace of need, in the desperate, gnawing hunger to prove them all wrong. Every sneer, every whisper of pile au nez, every reminder of limited opportunity becomes fuel for an internal fire that will someday scorch a continent. You learn early that knowledge is power, that logic provides control, and that true strength lies not in accepting limitations, but in utterly refusing to be defined by them. This period is less about military training and more about psychological conditioning. It's here, in the solitude of your studies, isolated by language and class, that you develop the self-reliance of a siege engine. You trust your own mind above all else. You learn to find comfort in isolation, making it a fortress rather than a prison. This period implants a fundamental belief. If you are clever enough, disciplined enough, and relentless enough, you can overcome anything. Yet, there's a tragic irony simmering beneath the surface. While these struggles build an unbreakable inner core, they also leave a permanent scar. The chip on your shoulder isn't just a phase. It becomes part of your fundamental architecture. The drive to prove yourself, born from these early wounds, is a trigger that may never truly be satisfied, no matter how high you climb. You are constantly chasing a validation that the boy in the gray corridors never received, an echo of inadequacy that even crowns and empires might not fully silence. Consider this. What does it truly mean to be born from barracks? It means your foundations aren't laid in comfort, but in challenge. Your first language of ambition isn't spoken in salons, but in silent, solitary struggle. Ask yourself, does overcoming immense early limitation create a leader uniquely equipped for hardship? Or does it instill a perpetual anxiety, a need to constantly push harder, faster, further, lest the ghost of the straw-nosed boy reappear? The lessons learned here, in the quiet desperation of being an outsider, will shape every decision, every gamble, and ultimately, every fall that is yet to come. Revolution's crucible. You stand on the muddy slopes overlooking Toulon in 1793. The air bites cold, thick with the scent of gunpowder and the stench of desperation. This is the raw heart of the French Revolution, boiling over into civil war. Royalist factions, propped up by the formidable British fleet anchored in the harbor, defy the new republic. Chaos is the only constant. Republican forces, a ragtag assembly of zealots and green recruits led by committee, are stalled, disorganized, and frankly, clueless. Into this maelstrom steps a young artillery captain, barely 24 years. He isn't given a grand command, just a modest responsibility for the scattered batteries. But where others see only confusion and an impregnable enemy, Napoleon sees a single decisive point, a rugged promontory controlling the harbor entrance, nicknamed Little Gibraltar. Control that, and the British fleet is trapped, the Royalists cut off. His plan is simple, direct, and utterly audacious. It cuts through the committee's endless debates like a cannonball. He needs to mass artillery on that height. His superiors, older, steeped in cautious, positional warfare, are hesitant, even dismissive. They talk of sieges measured in months, not days. But Napoleon, armed with a terrifying clarity, ignores their inertia. He browbeats, cajoles, demands, pushing men and dragging heavy cannons through treacherous mud under constant fire. It is a sheer force of will, meeting an immovable obstacle. He doesn't just direct from the rear. He is in the thick of it, exposing himself to inspire his men. In the final push for the height, you feel the desperate energy, the bayonets fixing, the shouts echoing across the ravaged earth. He takes a bayonet wound to the thigh, a deep, painful cut that would mark him for life, a physical scar etched alongside the legend being born. But he succeeds. Little Gibraltar falls. The batteries are emplaced, raining fire down on the British ships below. The enemy fleet, trapped and exposed, has no choice but to withdraw, taking thousands of Royalist refugees with them. The siege is broken. Toulon is retaken for the Republic. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a revelation. The revolution, floundering for decisive leadership, suddenly discovered Napoleon Bonaparte. And perhaps more importantly, Napoleon discovered his own terrifying capacity to see with perfect clarity through impossible situations, to act with absolute conviction, and to bend reality and men to his will. Consider this moment. In times of ultimate upheaval, when old structures crumble and confusion reigns, who rises? Not necessarily the most experienced, but those with the sharpest vision and the courage to act decisively on it. Was this brilliance, or simply the audacity of youth meeting a void? What would you have done? Told by cautious veterans that your simple plan was impossible. Fortune certainly favors the bold, but Toulon suggests sustained success would require that boldness to be anchored by strategic genius, not just desperate luck. You march into Cairo in August 1798, the dust of the pyramids still clinging to your boots. A new world opens up, a land steeped in pharaohs, Mamluk cavalry, and secrets whispered by the wind. You stand triumphant after the stunning victory at the Battle of the Pyramids, and for a moment, the impossible feels within reach. He, Napoleon, dreams of following in the footsteps of Alexander the Great, not just conquering, but charting a path eastward, perhaps all the way to India, a strategic dagger aimed at Britain's vital Eastern Empire. This isn't just about military power, it's about legend. It's the almost romantic side of his ambition. He establishes the Institute of Egypt, not just for control, but for knowledge, bringing scientists, scholars, artists. They uncover ancient wonders, meticulously documenting this alien world. You see him poring over maps of antique conquests, envisioning caravans and distant campaigns, a grand tapestry of global dominance unfolding before his eyes. This intense focus on the horizon, on the land route to glory, and the allure of ancient knowledge reveals a man whose ambition wasn't merely practical, it was sublime, chasing immortality through conquest and discovery. But here lies the tragic irony, a subtle, fatal flaw shimmering like a heat haze. While he is lost in the grandeur of Cairo, dreaming of land empires and cataloging mummies, a different reality unfolds hundreds of miles away. The fundamental truth of his position, that his army arrived by sea, is brutally exposed. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson, a nemesis whose shadow would grow long over Napoleon's career, annihilates his fleet at Aboukir Bay, the Battle of the Nile. The ships that brought you here, your lifeline to France, your means of supply and escape, are gone, burning or sunk beneath the waves. This is the starkest illustration of the critical insight. Vision, no matter how grand or romantic, without a grounding in strategic reality, is a mirage. While Napoleon's military genius shone brightly on land, the destruction of his fleet was a catastrophic oversight, a consequence of neglecting logistics and strategic vulnerability while fixated on the allure of the internal conquest. You can conquer cities, you can uncover ancient texts, but you cannot conquer the sea if your navy is at the bottom of it. Ask yourself, was this soaring vision or fatal blindness? What would you have done, standing there in Cairo, the echoes of ancient glory in your ears, knowing your ships were gone? The takeaway is harsh but clear. Even the most brilliant plan, the most expansive ambition, crumbles if you neglect the fundamentals of supply lines, communication, and recognizing the enemy's strength where your own is weakest. The desert was conquered, yes, but the ocean reclaimed its dominance, turning a potential stepping stone into a gilded cage. The air in the orangery at St. Cloud is thick with the scent of damp wool and nervous anticipation on this 18th Brumaire, Year 8, November 9th, 1799. You are here, an unseen observer, watching the general you know from triumphant dispatches attempt a conquest of a different kind. Napoleon Bonaparte, the hero returning from Egypt, walks purposefully towards the Council of 500. He envisions a swift, bloodless transfer of power, a legal maneuver dressed in the authority of his popular renown. He strides in, expecting deference, perhaps applause. Instead, you hear a roar. It's not the cheer of a grateful populace or the disciplined shout of soldiers. It's fury. "Down with the tyrant," they scream. "Outlaw him." The deputies, robed figures of the revolution, surge forward, no longer statesmen but a political mob. They press in, grabbing at him, their faces contorted with rage and fear. This isn't a battlefield where orders are obeyed and squares hold firm. This is chaos, unexpected and overwhelming. The general who commanded armies falters. You see him stumble, perhaps from the press, perhaps from shock. He looks pale, dizzy, on the verge of collapse, the great commander nearly fainting in the face of civilian resistance. Grenadiers rush in, not on his command for the takeover, but to rescue him, physically hauling him out of the hostile chamber. It is undignified, messy, a stark, brutal contrast to the clean lines of his battlefield victories. This moment rips back the curtain on a crucial truth. Military power, forged in discipline and directed force, is a fundamentally different creature than political power, which thrives on negotiation, narrative, and the fickle will of men. Napoleon, the master strategist of war, was amateurish here, exposed and vulnerable. His ambition was boundless, but his approach was flawed. He thought the sheer weight of his popularity and military might would simply impose his will. He learned, violently and awkwardly, that seizing political control requires more than just force. It demands cunning, precise timing, and the manipulation of perception. It's a chess game, not a cavalry charge. The tragic irony hangs heavy. The man who conquered states was nearly defeated by a room full of shouting politicians. His grand entrance became a humiliating scramble. Ask yourself, could you, standing there, the invincible general, have anticipated such a raw, visceral rejection? Would your battlefield instincts have served you, or failed as his did? And consider this. The entire plot was rescued not by Napoleon's quick thinking inside the orangery, but by the presence of mind and political savvy of his brother, Lucien, who rallied the troops outside with a fabricated tale of assassins threatening the council. Even history's most self-made legends often stand on the shoulders or are saved by the actions of others. This wasn't brilliance in action. It was a near disaster salvaged by contingency and the cool head of a man who understood political theater better than the star general. The coup's messiness wasn't just a stumble. It was a profound lesson in the limits of force when confronted by the unpredictable storm of politics. You stand in a quiet, lamp-lit room. The scent of beeswax and aging paper hangs heavy in the air. It is late, deep in the consulate period, long after the trumpets have faded and the smoke of battle has cleared. Here, the wars are fought with quill pens and arguments, not cannons and cavalry. Papers are stacked high, looming towers of proposed laws and decrees. This isn't a war room. It's the workshop of a new state. Napoleon, now first consul, isn't leading a charge across a frozen river. He is presiding over late-night council meetings, his intensity undimmed, perhaps even heightened, by the civilian setting. He is here, hour after hour, hammering out the details of the civil code, the monumental legal framework that will become his most enduring legacy, influencing European law for centuries. You hear his voice, sharp, questioning, demanding clarity and reason. He's arguing with seasoned lawyers, brilliant jurists, administrative experts, men who thought they knew the law until this Corsican soldier started dissecting their proposals line by line. This is the surprising face of ambition, not just seizing power, but using it, meticulously, tediously, to build order from the revolutionary chaos. He doesn't just sign decrees, he shapes them, diving into the minutiae of property rights, family law, contracts, often correcting legal scholars with astonishing precision. But it doesn't stop with the code. Look around. While these debates rage, other foundations are being laid. He is reorganizing the entire educational system, creating the lycées that will train generations of French citizens, shaping young minds as deliberately as he shapes armies. He establishes the Bank of France, bringing financial stability to a nation reeling from revolutionary bankruptcy, a crucial anchor for a revitalized economy. And in a bold, politically risky move, he signs the Concordat with Pope Pius VII, mending the deep, painful rift with the Catholic Church that had torn France apart. This wasn't about piety. It was shrewd statecraft, understanding the need to heal a wounded national psyche. This is the constructive side of his ambition, often overshadowed by the military glory. It's the slow, grinding work of administration, system building, and political negotiation. He is not just a conqueror. He is a supreme administrator, recognizing that lasting power isn't held by force alone, but earned through stability, prosperity, and a coherent framework of law and governance. The insight here is profound. True leadership involves the tedious, detailed work of administration and system building, not just grand pronouncements or battlefield victories. It requires patience, a deep understanding of complex systems, and the willingness to argue about cadastral surveys as fiercely as troop movements. Ask yourself, could you command an army and personally oversee the drafting of a nation's tax code? What would you prioritize if the fate of a state rested on both? The takeaway is clear, even if often ignored. Lasting power comes from establishing stable foundations, not just achieving temporary victories. He built the structure first, knowing the empire would need walls as strong as its swords. The whispers begin subtly, a rising tide of voices calling not just for order, but for permanence. You hear them in the salons, among the politicians you elevated, in the carefully drafted petitions. They speak of plots, of threats to the stability you've built, arguing that only a hereditary title, a true dynasty, can cement the gains of the revolution and ward off the ghosts of Bourbon monarchy. It is a symphony of manufactured consent, orchestrated with deliberate purpose. You see the mechanisms at work: the discovery of plots, the Catadal conspiracy, the execution of the Duc d'Enghien, conveniently fueling the narrative that the Republic is too fragile, that only a king, or rather an emperor, can protect it. Yet beneath the political calculation, there's an undeniable pull, a visceral desire. First Consul is powerful, yes, but it is temporary. It lacks the deep historical resonance, the almost mythical authority of a crown. You feel the ambition evolving, shifting like tectonic plates beneath the surface of your being. It's no longer just about doing great things for France, about implementing reforms, winning battles, rebuilding a nation. It's becoming about being recognized on the grandest possible stage, about creating a personal legacy that isn't merely tied to your lifetime achievements, but to a dynastic line, echoing the Caesars, the Holy Roman Emperors, the very monarchs you replaced or intimidated. This drive isn't purely strategic. It's deeply personal, fueled by an ego that has tasted unprecedented success and craves ultimate validation. You long for acceptance, not just from the French people, but from the old, established monarchies of Europe. The irony is sharp. You conquer them, you rearrange their borders, you place your own relatives on their thrones, and yet a part of you seeks their nod of recognition, their reluctant admission that you are now one of them, a legitimate member of the exclusive club of crowned heads. The title of emperor is the ultimate symbol of this belonging, even as it simultaneously declares your supremacy over them. Here is the chilling insight. Ambition, initially a force for incredible accomplishment, can subtly transform. It moves from a focus on public good or revolutionary ideals to a consuming need for personal status, for historical supremacy, for a name etched in eternity, not just for what you did, but for what you were. Ask yourself, at this pivotal moment, was this a necessary step to consolidate power for the nation's benefit? Or did the dazzling prospect of a personal, imperial legacy begin to eclipse the very ideals you once claimed to serve? The pursuit of status, of ultimate personal glory, can become a gilded cage, trapping the leader within their own legend. It is December 2, 1805. You stand on the Pratzen Heights, the heart of the coming storm. The air bites with frost, thick mist clinging to the valleys below, shrouding the world in cotton wool. But then, a miracle of timing, a sign perhaps, the mist thins, the sun of Austerlitz, breaks through the clouds, painting the frosty landscape in sudden dramatic light. Below, the allied armies of Austria and Russia stir, a slow, predictable tide. You watch, heart hammering, as they move exactly as Napoleon anticipated. Their center, the linchpin of their formation, weakens as corps are drawn off to envelop his flank. His trap is sprung. From this vantage point, he sees it all: the meticulously scouted terrain, the calculated gamble on the enemy's psychology, their belief in their numerical superiority, their underestimation of his speed. His forces are precisely positioned, coiled like a viper. The signal comes: attack the weakened center. You feel the ground tremble as Lannes and Soult's corps surge uphill, straight for the heart of the Allied line. It's not just a charge. It's a perfectly timed, brutally efficient maneuver. They cleave the enemy in two, isolating flanks, creating chaos where there was intended order. This is military genius at its terrifying peak. Not merely courage, but intellect weaponized. The understanding of terrain, the reading of minds across the battlefield, the precise coordination of thousands of men and horses acting as a single, devastating organism. Austerlitz is hailed instantly as his masterpiece, a victory so complete it doesn't just win a battle, it shatters the Third Coalition, reshapes the map of Europe, and solidifies Napoleon's image as an invincible commander. The insight is clear, stark, and chilling. Strategic brilliance, when wielded with such absolute mastery, is a terrifying tool, capable of bending reality to one's will on the battlefield. It doesn't just defeat armies, it breaks nations. But the takeaway is a whisper of future tragedy. While such decisive victory demonstrates unparalleled mastery, it also breeds a dangerous, seductive overconfidence. A belief settles deep within the victor's soul that one's supreme intellect can solve any problem, including those that are not purely military, those tangled in politics, economics, and the unpredictable will of entire populations. Ask yourself, witnessing this perfect, devastating display, would you believe you could ever lose again? You stand on the banks of the Niemen River near Tilsit in the summer of 1807. The air hums with the tension of empires. Out on a specially constructed raft in the middle of the water sits Napoleon Bonaparte, master of Europe, and Tsar Alexander I of Russia, his former foe turned reluctant admirer. On the Prussian side, diminished and humiliated, King Frederick William III waits like a beggar for scraps from a king's table. This is not a negotiation, it is a partition. You watch as Napoleon, with the casual arrogance only absolute victory grants, redraws the map of a continent. He dictates terms, not discusses them. Prussia, once a mighty power, is carved up, losing half its territory. New states are conjured into existence from the ether of conquest. The Grand Duchy of Warsaw appears, a phantom Poland designed to needle Russia and Austria. The Confederation of the Rhine solidifies, a bloc of German states now subservient to Paris, extinguishing centuries of Holy Roman Empire history with a stroke of the pen. Old powers are treated with disdain. New alliances are forged not through shared interest, but through subjugation and temporary convenience. This moment, on that raft, encapsulates the intoxicating power of unbridled success. Napoleon genuinely believes he holds the reins of destiny, that he can mold nations and peoples to his will, ignoring their histories, languages, and long-held allegories. He's playing a geopolitical game of chess, but the pieces are living nations, bleeding and resentful beneath his hand. The insight here is stark. Absolute power, backed by invincible armies, does allow for radical, immediate restructuring of the world order. Yet, simultaneously, by ignoring the deep currents of historical identity, national pride, and the bitter resentments of rulers and populations you have just crushed, you are not building a stable future. You are merely postponing inevitable conflict. Consider the King of Prussia, waiting on the bank. His kingdom is shattered, not just by military defeat, but by a conqueror's contempt. How could such a profound humiliation not fester and seek revenge? What about the German states forced into a French-led confederation, or the Poles given a pseudo-state under a foreign master? You witness the profound truth that ruling solely by decree and military strength creates vassals bound by chains, not loyal partners bound by shared vision or genuine respect. Empires built entirely on conquest are inherently unstable, resting not on solid foundations, but on suppressed volcanoes of discontent and dormant nationalism, waiting for the moment to erupt. Ask yourself, when is imposing your will on others a sign of strength? And when is it a fatal blindness to the realities of human nature and history? Paper flows from Paris, ink drying on momentous decrees. Berlin, Milan, Fontainebleau. You watch as Napoleon, master strategist of the battlefield, now turns his conquering gaze to the economic front. His target, Great Britain, the island nation forever beyond his direct reach. The weapon, the continental system. You hear his command echoing through palaces and ports alike. Europe is closed to British trade. No ships carrying goods from Albion shall touch continental shores. The aim is singular, brutal, to strangle the life out of Britain's economy, forcing her to her knees through commercial isolation. He sees it as the ultimate siege, a continent-wide blockade enforced not by ships alone, but by political will and military might. But step closer, beyond the grand pronouncements, and you see the immediate, grinding reality of this continental straitjacket. Walk along the quays in Hamburg or Genoa and feel the eerie silence. The bustling ports, arteries of European commerce for centuries, lie idle. Sails are furled, cranes stand motionless. Hear the quiet desperation of the merchants, their livelihoods vanishing overnight, their warehouses filled with goods nobody can buy or sell. The vibrant tapestry of international trade, woven over generations, is being brutally unraveled, and the resentment simmers. It begins as whispers among disgruntled traders, swells into murmurs among his allies whose own economies are suffering, and eventually becomes a low, constant groan even within France itself. Food prices rise. Essential raw materials become scarce. Napoleon is forcing a complex, interdependent continent, a living organism of supply and demand, into an artificial, sealed box. The rigidity of military command meets the fluidity of markets and human necessity. And the clash is devastating. What he fails to command, he cannot stop. Smuggling becomes not just a crime, but a thriving, almost heroic industry. Fortunes are made in the shadows, goods secretly moved across borders, under the noses of his customs officials. Entire communities turn to illicit trade, finding innovative ways to defy the emperor's decrees. It's a stark illustration. You can march armies and conquer nations, but you cannot command markets or human ingenuity into submission with military force alone. The very attempt to achieve total control generates a powerful, decentralized opposition, fueled by economic necessity and a primal desire to simply trade. Was this strategic brilliance, identifying Britain's vulnerability? Or was it a fatal blindness, ignoring the fundamental realities of commerce and human nature? He sought to starve Britain, but found himself starving his own empire's prosperity and loyalty. You are standing in 1808, looking towards Spain. Your empire stretches across a continent. Your will is law from Lisbon to Warsaw. The Bourbons in Spain, a weak, squabbling dynasty, feel like a relic, an anomaly in your grand design for a unified Europe. A crisis erupts within the Spanish court, a perfect opportunity. You summon the royal family to Bayonne in France, a velvet trap. With cunning and pressure, you orchestrate their abdication. The plan is simple, elegant in its ruthlessness. Replace the Bourbon king with your own brother, Joseph. Install a Bonapartist on the Spanish throne. Bring the nation firmly into the continental system. Secure your southern flank. You expect grumbling, perhaps isolated resistance, but nothing you cannot easily manage with a few divisions. This, you believe, is merely another calculation on the grand chessboard of Europe. Another king to be moved, another piece adjusted. But you have walked into a storm unlike any you have faced. You underestimated the soul of a nation. Spain is not Italy, not Germany, not Austria. It is fiercely Catholic, deeply traditional, forged by centuries of fighting invaders, its national identity inextricably linked to its faith and its monarchy, even a flawed one. When news of the abdications reaches Madrid, and then the rest of the peninsula, the people do not accept Joseph. They do not see a new king. They see a foreign usurper, an infidel imposed by force. On May 2nd, 1808, a popular uprising explodes in Madrid, the Dos de Mayo. It is brutally suppressed by your Marshal Murat, but the spark has ignited a wildfire. This is no conventional war. Your Grande Armée, designed for crushing decisive battles against standing armies, finds itself facing an enemy without a uniform, without a front line. Guerrilla, the little war, is born from the Spanish soil, the enraged populace. Farmers, priests, women, children, anyone with a knife, a scythe, a hunting rifle becomes a combatant. They ambush supply trains in mountain passes, assassinate isolated soldiers, melt back into the villages and rugged terrain. Your troops, used to pitched battles, are constantly harassed, their morale eroded by unseen enemies and brutal reprisals that only fuel more hatred. Every village becomes a potential ambush, every forest a hiding place for saboteurs. You send army after army into the Spanish crucible. Marshals like Massena and Soult, heroes of Austerlitz and Jena, find themselves bogged down, unable to deliver a decisive blow that brings peace. The British under Wellesley, later Wellington, land in Portugal and begin a slow, grinding campaign, forcing you to divert even more resources. Spain becomes, in your own frustrated words, a bitter ulcer that drains your treasury and bleeds your best men. Tens of thousands of French soldiers perish, not in glorious charges, but in brutal skirmishes, sieges of stubborn cities like Zaragoza, or simply succumbing to disease and exhaustion in a hostile land. Here is the stark reality, the brutal lesson etched in Spanish blood and gold. Military genius, strategic brilliance, and overwhelming force are not enough when you confront a people fighting for their very identity on their own land. You can defeat armies, you can depose kings, but you cannot conquer the spirit of a nation united in resistance. The irony bites deep. You, the child of the revolution that championed the rights of the people, are now the oppressor, crushing a popular will. You sought to impose order and modernity, but you ignored the profound power of tradition, religion, and national pride. The Spanish ulcer bleeds you white for 6 long years. It ties down hundreds of thousands of troops desperately needed elsewhere for the looming confrontation in the East. It fuels the imagination of resistors across Europe, proving that Napoleon's power has limits, that even the invincible can be challenged by a determined populace. Ask yourself, was this conquest born of necessity or a profound misreading of human nature? Could you have foreseen the depth of this resistance, or did your relentless ambition blind you to the simple truth that some things cannot be taken by force alone? Spain becomes a preview, a warning of the limits of pure power against the intangible strength of belief and identity. It is a wound that will never truly heal, weakening the foundations of your empire. Piece by bloody piece, you stand awkwardly, a ghost in the ornate room, as Napoleon delivers the crushing news. His voice, usually booming with authority, is low, almost strained, but the words themselves are like sharp shards of glass. He tells Josephine, the woman who stood by him through the chaos of the revolution and the furnace of early campaigns, that they must divorce. You see her face crumble, hear her stifled sob. Their marriage, unconventional and often tempestuous, was nonetheless a partnership forged in the very fires of his ascent, a shared history woven into the fabric of his rise to power. She was empress, not just by title, but by proximity to his ambition, a part of the legend. But his reason is stark, devoid of sentiment. He needs an heir, a legitimate son, to solidify his dynasty, to plant his banner permanently among the ancient, blood-soaked trees of Europe's royal genealogies. He craves acceptance, not just through conquest, but through lineage, a validation from the very crowns he has humbled. It is a cold, calculated necessity in his eyes, a transaction on the grandest stage. The insight pierces the gilded air. The relentless pursuit of dynastic legacy can make a leader ruthless in their personal life, transforming the most intimate bonds into mere stepping stones or obstacles. Almost immediately, the wheels turn. He doesn't mourn the loss of a genuine connection. He engineers a replacement. He marries Marie-Louise, an Austrian archduchess. The irony is brutal, almost comical if it weren't so tragic. He defeats the Austrian emperor, shatters his army, dictates terms of peace, and then takes his daughter's hand in marriage. This act, born purely of political calculation, highlights ambition's profound personal cost. The sacrificing of a deeply intertwined history, of affection, of shared struggle, for the sake of perceived political necessity and blue-blooded lineage. Reflect on this moment. Power sought for the sake of establishing a bloodline, for dynastic permanence, can tragically isolate you from those who supported you when you had nothing. It leaves you surrounded by political arrangements, by strategic marriages and alliances, rather than genuine affection and loyalty born of shared experience. He exchanges the comfort of familiarity for the cold prestige of a royal crib. What price would you pay for such a legacy? What would you sacrifice to ensure your name echoed through generations, even if it meant silencing the heart of your own home? It is June 1812. You stand on the banks of the Niemen River, the invisible border between the vast French Empire and the even vaster, enigmatic expanse of Russia. Before you, stretching as far as the eye can see, is a sight that must make the earth tremble. 500,000 men. This is the Grande Armée, the grandest army Europe has ever assembled, drawn from 24 nations, a living, breathing testament to one man's unparalleled power and organizational genius. Polish lancers, German infantry, Italian cavalry, Dutch engineers, all marching under the tricolor banner, bound together by a loyalty, or perhaps just an obedience, to the Emperor Napoleon. You watch as the first pontoons are laid, as the columns begin their inexorable march eastward. The air hums not just with anticipation, but with the sheer, terrifying potential of this force. This is the culmination of years of strategic maneuvering, of assembling not just soldiers, but the complex machinery required to move, feed, and fight with such a gargantuan host. It is a logistical feat, almost as astounding as his victories on the battlefield. Almost. But beneath the magnificent spectacle, a chill seeps into the air, colder than the summer morning. You see the strain already, the supply lines, stretched taut like violin strings ready to snap. The sheer difficulty of provisioning 500,000 men and their thousands of horses in a country deliberately stripped bare by its retreating inhabitants. The objectives? Vast, shifting, poorly defined, beyond forcing the Tsar, Alexander I, back into submission to the continental system. And the warnings, the warnings echoed through the French court, whispered by veteran generals who knew Russia, by diplomats who understood the Tsar's stubborn pride, by those who simply looked at maps and saw endless forests, plains, and the unforgiving grip of winter. Warnings about distance, about climate, about an enemy who might trade space for time, retreat rather than fight decisive battles. All dismissed, he stands there, watching the crossing, seemingly invincible, radiating a belief in his own power so absolute it borders on the divine. He sees the 500,000 men, and he sees not logistical nightmares, but sheer, overwhelming force. He believes his will, honed by a dozen victorious campaigns, his strategic brilliance, proven time and again against Europe's greatest powers, and the sheer size of his army can compel Tsar Alexander to submit. He will march to Moscow, dictate terms, and return victorious, just as he always has. Here lies the fatal flaw, exposed not by an enemy cannon, but by the quiet, creeping poison of success. This decision, this grand crossing of the Niemen, is driven by an overconfidence so profound it blinds him. Years of victory, of defying the odds, of bending reality to his will, have bred a dangerous belief in his own infallibility. He has won so often, against such formidable foes that the very idea of practical limitations, of warnings based on geography or climate or an opponent's sheer refusal to play by the expected rules, simply evaporates in the heat of his ambition. He believes his past success is a guarantee of future victory, a magical shield against the brutal realities of distance and logistics. It's a tragic irony. The organizational genius who could assemble this army simultaneously ignores the organizational nightmare of sustaining it deep within enemy territory. Hubris, that potent poison, saturates the air on the riverbank. Believing you cannot fail is the first step towards disaster, especially when facing an opponent whose motivations and capabilities you fundamentally misunderstand or refuse to acknowledge. Russia isn't Austria or Prussia. With fixed capitals and traditional armies eager for decisive battle, it is a vast, sprawling entity that can absorb blows and trade territory for time. Its greatest allies, the coming cold and its own boundless space. Ask yourself, was this Napoleon's strategic brilliance adapted for a massive scale, or the moment his unparalleled confidence curdled into catastrophic hubris? What would you have done, standing in his boots, with the weight of an empire and 500,000 lives resting on a single, audacious gamble based on a fundamental misreading of reality? The answer echoes across history. This decision was not strategy. It was an act of supreme, self-destructive faith in his own legend. And history teaches few lessons more brutally than this. Believing you cannot lose is the surest way to court defeat. You walk through the streets of Moscow, September 1812. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of burning wood, an acrid scent that clings to your uniform, a stench of victory. That feels suspiciously like defeat. All around you, the grand old city, the heart of Mother Russia, is a sea of flames. You expected triumph, a conquered capital laid humbly at your feet, a comfortable winter quarter, and a treaty dictated on your terms. Instead, you find ashes. The Russians have vanished like mist, their army slipping away eastward, refusing the decisive battle you craved, refusing to stand and defend this ancient prize. And worse, they have deliberately sacrificed their own sanctuary. The governor, Rostopchin, a figure you barely considered beyond his military role, orchestrated this fiery immolation, a scorched earth strategy, so radical, so self-destructive, it barely registered as a possibility in your strategic calculations. You had accounted for armies, for geography, for logistics, but not for this level of national, almost suicidal defiance. This isn't surrender. It's an act of war waged against the conqueror using the conquered territory itself. It's a bitter pill to swallow. You hold the city, yes, but the enemy is untouched, their will unbroken, and your prize is utterly worthless for sustenance or shelter. You establish your headquarters in the Kremlin, an island of stone rising above the fiery sea. From its windows, you gaze out upon the devastation, a growing unease coiling in your gut. Weeks stretch into a month. You send messengers to the Tsar, expecting the standard pleas for terms, the surrender of a defeated monarch. No reply comes. Only silence, vast and chilling, like the Russian steppes themselves. You are in Moscow, the historical target, the symbolic heart, but you hold nothing but a hollow shell. The army, exhausted and undersupplied from the long march, begins to feel the gnawing pangs of hunger and the encroaching chill of the coming autumn. What little food wasn't burned was carried away by the retreating population. Every day you wait, hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough, is a day the weather worsens. A day your supply lines stretch thinner across the vast, hostile land. A day the phantom Russian army regroups and grows stronger, while yours dwindles, not from battle, but from hardship and demoralization. This is the terrible paradox. You achieved the objective. You took the capital. But the objective was predicated on false assumptions about your enemy's resolve and what taking a city truly meant in this context. You thought seizing territory was the key. They understood that breaking the enemy's spirit and capacity to fight was the true victory, and they were willing to pay an unimaginable price to achieve it. Your military genius had mastered the battlefield, the maneuver, the grand charge, but you had failed to master the psychology of an entire nation, their willingness to endure unimaginable suffering rather than submit. The great chess game of war, you realized too late, wasn't just about capturing the king's square, but about forcing the king himself to yield. And the Tsar, miles away in St. Petersburg, was refusing to even sit at the negotiating table you had so carefully prepared. Ask yourself, was this the inevitable consequence of ambition unbound, or a singular blind spot in an otherwise unparalleled strategic mind? You stand in the ashes of your expected triumph, the chilling reality settling in. You have conquered a ghost town, and the real enemy remains, waiting for winter to become your most formidable foe. The brilliant campaign that brought you here, across vast distances, overcoming logistical nightmares and stubborn resistance, now hangs suspended, unproductive. The insight is brutal in its simplicity. Holding symbolic ground is meaningless if the enemy refuses to acknowledge your dominion there, or if the ground you hold offers you nothing. Victory isn't just taking, it's breaking. And you had taken Moscow, but broken nothing fundamental of Russian will or capability. This long, silent wait in the burning city wasn't just a delay. It was the precise moment the tide of destiny began its inexorable turn, not with a bang, but with the quiet, chilling realization that you had been outplayed, not by an army on the field, but by fire, ice, and an enemy's unfathomable refusal to yield. What would you have done, standing in his boots, watching the last wisps of smoke curl into the vast, indifferent sky, feeling the first bite of the coming Russian winter? The clock is ticking, and every second spent waiting is a nail in the coffin of the Grand Army. The snow bites at your face, 1,000 tiny needles driven by a wind that seems to laugh at your misery. You are one of them, a straggler in the vast, broken column staggering back through the endless white desolation of Russia. The crisp uniforms are long gone, replaced by tattered rags, scavenged furs, anything that offers a thin, futile barrier against the unimaginable cold. Your breath freezes in plumes before you, and the ground is littered with the bodies of those who could go no further, their faces locked in a silent scream. The Grande Armée, the magnificent engine that had conquered Europe, now it is dissolving before your eyes, not into a disciplined retreat, but into a nightmare of individual survival. Hunger gnaws at your gut, a constant, sickening ache. Disease is a shadow, claiming weakened bodies with ruthless efficiency. The Cossacks, phantom horsemen, harry the flanks like wolves, their lances picking off the weak and the slow, adding another layer of terror to the already unbearable reality. You see men you marched proudly with just months ago, veterans of Austerlitz, Jena, Friedland, reduced to desperate, freezing figures, eyes vacant with exhaustion and despair. They discard their weapons, their packs, anything that weighs them down, until all that remains is the desperate primal urge to simply keep putting one foot in front of the other. This is the brutal, tangible human cost of strategic failure. Napoleon, the architect of this grand, ill-fated invasion, had envisioned a swift campaign, a decisive victory that would force the Tsar to terms. He saw maps, armies, objectives. He did not, perhaps, truly see this. The distance between his grand plan, conceived in palaces and war rooms, and its horrific, visceral execution on the ground in the Russian winter, is vast. A gap measured in frozen limbs, starved bellies, and the shattered sanity of tens of thousands. And where is he, the emperor? He has left. Napoleon departed the army in early December, riding ahead to Paris to raise new troops, to shore up his collapsing empire, to prepare for the next struggle. A pragmatic decision, say the histories, a necessity to preserve his power base and build a new force. But out here, in the soul-crushing cold, struggling for every breath, it feels like abandonment. The soldiers who had worshipped him, who had followed him to the ends of the earth, are left to face the icy wrath of winter and the pursuing enemy alone. This is the bitter irony. The man who embodied the ambition of a generation, who promised glory and dominion, ultimately leaves his most devoted followers to perish in the snow, prioritizing the preservation of his system over the survival of the individuals who comprised it. This horrific retreat serves as a stark, undeniable truth. A leader's strategic errors, however grand the vision behind them, have devastating, tangible consequences for the human beings who serve them. The ultimate test of effective leadership is never just the brilliance of the plan, but its cost in blood and suffering when it meets the harsh reality of the world. What does it profit a man to gain an empire if it requires the lives of 500,000 souls freezing in a foreign land? Ask yourself, when the stakes are this high and the cost is paid in human lives, does ambition ever truly justify the price? Or is the true measure of leadership found not in how far you can push your army, but in ensuring you can bring them home? This retreat is not just a military disaster. It is a profound moral failure, a chilling testament to what happens when the human cost becomes an afterthought in the pursuit of power. You stand on the vast, flat plains outside Leipzig, October 1813. The air bites with the coming autumn chill, but it's the cold certainty of the surrounding landscape that truly chills. Before you unfolds a tableau of unprecedented scale. This isn't a single clear enemy army drawn up for battle. It's a sea of banners representing almost every major power in Europe. Russia, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, Bavaria, Saxony, at first, then switching sides. A dizzying array of nations, united by a common burning desire. They want Napoleon gone. This moment is the culmination of years of relentless ambition, of victories that sowed seeds of future vengeance. You defeated the Austrians at Ulm and Austerlitz, humbled Prussia at Jena Auerstedt, brought Russia to heel at Friedland, briefly, placed your brothers on thrones across the continent. Each triumph was a hammer blow, forging not just an empire, but a continent-wide resentment. Now, that scattered resentment has coalesced into an unstoppable force. The Battle of Nations is less a single contest of wills and more a reckoning, an avalanche triggered by the seismic shifts of your own making. Look at your forces. They are numerous. Yes, swollen by the latest conscription call-ups. Young men, many barely out of their teens, thrown into the crucible. They lack the hardened experience of the veterans lost in the Russian snows or scattered across a stretched empire. Beside them stand your marshals, legendary names, yes, but worn down by years of campaigning. Some questioning the endless struggle, others harboring quiet doubts or grievances. You are severely outnumbered, facing perhaps twice your strength, maybe more. This isn't just a military disadvantage, it's a political one. You stand alone, or nearly alone, against a Europe you alienated. The battle begins, a monstrous, multi-day grinding struggle across every approach to the city. It's a maelstrom of artillery fire, massed cavalry charges, and desperate infantry assaults. You attempt your characteristic complex maneuvers, seeking to exploit weaknesses, to break the enemy's center as you did at Austerlitz. But the sheer weight of numbers, the coordination of so many Allied corps pressing in from all sides, prevents any decisive breakthrough. Your young soldiers fight with courage, often holding their own against seasoned troops, but they bleed out faster than they can be reinforced. The enemy can afford staggering losses. You cannot. Here's a detail often overlooked. While Napoleon was still a tactical genius on the field, capable of reacting and adapting, the strategic situation was terminal. The coalition wasn't just fighting for territory. They were fighting for their very existence, for a return to the old order, or perhaps just a future free from the constant upheaval your ambition represented. This unified purpose gave them resilience that your fragmented empire, held together by force and personality, lacked. There's a bitter irony here. You, the revolutionary emperor who championed meritocracy and efficiency, are being defeated by the combined, if sometimes unwieldy, might of the old monarchies you scorned. Their shared fear of you was a stronger bond than any alliance you ever forged through conquest. The battle rages. Days blur into a cycle of attack and counterattack. The city of Leipzig itself becomes a focal point, its streets becoming a labyrinth of urban warfare. As the Allied noose tightens, the situation becomes hopeless. Your marshals urge retreat. The battlefield is a charnel house, and the reserves are gone. The strategic retreat turns into a near rout, exacerbated by a disastrous mistake. The single bridge designated for withdrawal over the Elster River is blown too early, trapping thousands of your soldiers in the city, leading to mass surrender and drowning. It is a chaotic, devastating end to the largest battle fought on European soil before World War I. Look at this defeat, its scale and its finality. This wasn't a tactical misstep in isolation. It was the inevitable consequence of years of unchallenged dominance built on coercion. Every humiliation you inflicted on a king, every territory you annexed, every alliance you forced, each act was a brick laid in the wall that now stands insurmountable before you. Sustained leadership, you learned too late, requires more than just victory. It requires diplomacy, respect, and the cultivation of genuine alliances, not just temporary subservience. Ask yourself, could Napoleon, with his towering ego and revolutionary drive, ever have truly embraced the compromises needed for long-term peace and alliances? Or was his trajectory of constant expansion and resultant opposition simply his destiny? The takeaway is brutal in its clarity. A legacy built on making others fear you when you are strong ensures that when you finally show weakness, the world will line up, united, to deliver the final blow. This field outside Leipzig is the ultimate monument to the coalition of the unwilling, patiently assembled by your own hand. You sit in exile on the windswept island of St. Helena, the vast ocean a constant, crushing reminder of a world lost. The man who once commanded millions, dictated terms to kings, and redrew the map of continents is now a prisoner, subject to the petty rules and watchful eyes of a British governor. The endless days blur into weeks, into years, each dawn a repetition of dwindling hope. What remains? The past. And so, you spend these final years dictating your memoirs, carefully, meticulously crafting your own legend for posterity. You recount triumphs, explain defeats, blame marshals, ministers, monarchs, even destiny itself. You reflect on the improbable journey from Corsican obscurity to the pinnacle of global power. Yet through all the words poured onto paper, perhaps you never fully grasp the core flaw that brought it all crashing down. It wasn't just betrayal, or bad luck, or the sheer weight of the world turning against you. It was the very engine that propelled you forward. Ambition. The principle laid bare in the desolate isolation of Longwood House is this: unchecked ambition, the fervent belief that one's will alone can conquer all obstacles. The stubborn laws of physics, the logistical nightmares of vast distances, the unpredictable spirit of nations, the festering resentment of those you dominate, is ultimately self-destructive. Think back to that moment, the ultimate act of self-creation, the coronation in Notre Dame. You didn't wait for the Pope. You took the crown and placed it upon your own head. This was more than just claiming power. It was a symbolic rejection of any external limits, whether divine right, ancient tradition, or even cautionary wisdom. You became your own source of authority, convinced of your own inevitability. Look at our own time, centuries removed, but wrestling with the same human drives. How many leaders, founders, or driven individuals today chase growth, power, or influence past the point of prudence? They alienate crucial allies, ignore blatant warnings from experts or colleagues, convinced their singular vision makes them immune to consequences. What empires, be they corporate monoliths or political movements, crumble not from external assault, but because the boundless ambition of one outweighs the collective wisdom of the many, or the practical, unyielding constraints of reality. It's a timeless pattern, etched in boardrooms and battlefields alike. What if Napoleon had stopped after Tilsit in 1807? What if he had consolidated his vast gains, accepted the borders, respected the spheres of influence he had carved out? History, tragically, rarely grants do-overs, but it offers lessons, written not just in treaties and decrees, but etched in blood and snow across the Russian plains. The timeless takeaway resonates across the centuries. Ambition is indeed the engine of progress, the spark that drives humanity forward. But without self-awareness, without the humility to recognize that reality has limits and others have agency, it becomes a runaway train, destined for spectacular derailment. As Napoleon himself perhaps delusionally declared from his lonely rock, impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools. His life, however, stands as a stark, tragic testament that reality has its own far more unforgiving vocabulary. The waves crash against the shore, a constant, indifferent echo of an ambition that finally met its match, the limits of the world itself.